comfortably. Well, welcome to our new chapter of discussion, whereby we shall be dealing with bones of the exoskeleton. And with us today, we have the skull. Remember, from my previous discussions, I've been talking of the appendicular skeleton, including the bones of the pectoral girdle, arm, forearm, the hand, and they went through to the bones of the pelvic girdle, to the bones of the thigh, bones of the leg, and finally the bones of the foot. I can really say for the previous discussion, it was just a really piece of work as compared to this, because for this, I've taken much time obtaining the exact information to present. So I really thank God because He's enabled me to complete the task. And for my remaining parts, just presentation, and if you be consistent with my presentation, you'll find what you've been looking for. For us, we have three images of the skull. The first one was obtained by the archaeologists for research purpose, and you can say some of the bones of the skull are missing due to some erosions or other environmental factors. And for the rest, two are the same bones, only that the third one, the bones of the skull, which are painted to bring us to the anatomy of exclusive bones of the skull. So for this, especially the part painted with brown is the frontal bone, then white we have the nasal bone, maxillary, we have the mandible, then we have the zygomatic. So please don't get scared about them because I'll be dealing with them individually so that you can have the exact or the real information about the bones of the skull. So for the introduction part, we have the skull is the bony framework of the head and contains 22 bones. When the ear ossicles, which are 3 pairs, and then the tiny bones associated with hearing, and the hyoid bone is excluded. But when the bones of the ear ossicles and the hyoid is included, the number goes up to 28. The skull rests on the superior end of the vertebral column and includes 2 sets of bones, which are the cranial bones and the facial bones. And these bones are, for the cranial, we have frontal bone, which is only 1, 2 parietal bones, 2 temporal bones, the occipital bone, the sphenoid bone, and the ethmoid bone. So the whole number brings us to 8. Then we have the 14 facial bones. These are the 2 nasal bones, 2 maxillary or maxillas, 2 zygomatic bones, the mandible, 2 cranial bones, 2 palatine bones, 2 inferior nasal conchae, and the vomer. So the sum of both cranial and the facial bones brings us to 22 bones of the skull. Moving forward, we have the element of the skull. And the skull is the entire bony framework of the head, including the lower jaw. The mandible is the lower jaw. The cranium is the skull without the mandible. The calvaria is the cranium without the face. The collate is the calvaria without the base. While the planchocranium is the facial skeleton. And finally, the neurocranium is the brain case. This is only used while studying the anatomy of the skull in strict anatomical location. So for the function of the skull, and the one which is the main function of the skull, is that the cranial bones form the cranial cavity, which encloses and protects the brain, which is the great and the delicate organ of the body. Then the skull also forms several smaller cavities, including the nasal cavity and the orbits, which are the eye sockets, and that they open to the exterior. Certain skull bones also contain cavities called the paranasal sinuses that are lined with mucous membrane and open into the nasal cavity. There are 4 basic sets of these sinuses, which are the maxillary, frontal, ethmoid, and sphenoid sinuses. So these sinuses are the opening within this specific set of bones, and they have basic or the important function in which that they allow the skull to increase in size without a corresponding change in the mass or weight of the bone. And so in addition to these sinuses of the skull, or the paranasal sinuses, they serve as the resonating chambers within the skull that intensify and prolong sound, thereby enhancing the quality of the voice. So this is just but a piece of work. You can go back and consider both the sinuses or the paranasal sinuses that are found in these bones and their major functions in the body. So that goes or takes you to the physiology part of study. So let's move ahead and consider other functions of the skull. Also within the skull are small middle and inner ear cavities in the temporal bone that houses the structures that are involved in hearing and equilibrium. Equilibrium is the balance. So those are the bonds of which I did talk earlier on. Despite of that, I've created another slide or slides which explains these small bones of the ear or the bones of the middle ear, which they help or they helps us in the hearing. Other than the auditory ossicles, the mandible is the only bone of the skull that has a large range of movement which aids in chewing. The mandible is in the lower jaw, or it contains the teeth of the lower jaw. Most of the skull bones are held together by sutures, joints that attach the bones and that are especially noticeable on the outer surface of the skull. And that's just a piece of work. So it's not part of the function, but it's a description about the skull. We shall be dealing with that later as we move ahead. The skull has numerous openings through which blood vessels and nerves are passed. So these openings are generally referred to as the foramens or the foraminers of blood and nerve vessels or the neural elements. Their inner surface or the surface of the skull attached to membranes, which are the meninges that stabilize the positions of the brain, blood vessels, and nerves. The outer surface of cranial bones provide large areas of attachment for muscle that involves or that move various parts of the head. So while turning your head, remember you have muscles and they definitely have a point of attachment around the skull or somewhere onto the skull. The bones also provide attachment for some muscles that are involved in producing facial expressions. And besides forming the framework of the face, the facial bones protect and provide support for the entrance of the digestive and respiratory system. That is basically true. Then together the cranial and the facial bones forms the foundation and support the delicate facial sense organs for vision, taste, smell, hearing, and equilibrium.